going to get started. So in the last 10 days, there has been a ton of stuff happening around the issue of American foreign policy as it relates to Israel-Palestine. Trump released his so-called peace plan last Tuesday, 2 Tuesdays ago, 2 weeks, been a big 2 weeks. And this plan is really a peace plan in name only, as it included no Palestinian participation, and no Palestinians were invited to the White House for the announcement with Netanyahu and Benny Gantz and Donald Trump. And this plan is designed to formalize, entrench, and legitimize the permanent Israeli control of the occupied West Bank and to undercut any prospect of Palestinian sovereignty or statehood. And rather than a serious proposal for peace, this is clearly an extension of the Trump administration's effort to further disenfranchise Palestinians and to promote a right-wing agenda in Israel, which began when Trump took office and builds on his previous moves around shoring up support for the occupation and making that more true on the ground. AIPAC's response to the release of this, quote, peace plan was to embrace it and publicly applaud Trump and his administration's effort. And then this last weekend, AIPAC ran hateful ads targeting Democrats that attacked some of the biggest advocates for Palestinian human rights, saying that they pose a threat maybe more sinister than ISIS and other terror groups. And then after a ton of blowback from the Jewish community, they retracted the ads and they've apologized. But this week also saw the unprecedented coalition of If Not Now and Move On and Indivisible and Working Families Party coming together to demand that all 2020 Democratic candidates skip AIPAC. And over the weekend, young American Jews were on the ground in New Hampshire, where they were putting the pressure on Democratic presidential candidates and already got a commitment from Senator Elizabeth Warren that she will skip AIPAC. Got brushed aside by both former Vice President Joe Biden and by Pete Buttigieg because neither of them felt like they needed to take seriously the urgent need to reveal AIPAC's fringe policies and to take a position on going to the conference. So we're in right now a incredibly ripe moment to set a new precedent for how our leaders, both public officials and Jewish communal leaders, are relating to AIPAC. And that's what we're going to dig into on this call tonight. So over the next half hour, we're going to hear a story from Jenna, who's a member of If Not Now, and it's going to tell us about their own experience attending the AIPAC conference previously. We're going to put their story in context by learning a little bit more about AIPAC and how it has impacted the American Jewish community, as well as U.S. foreign policy towards Israel and Palestine. And lastly, we're going to hear more about the campaign to skip AIPAC and how to plug in and encourage your public officials and Jewish communal leaders to skip the AIPAC conference this March. So first, I'd like to hand it off to Jenna, who's going to share their experience about attending AIPAC previously.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Amazing. My name's Jenna. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a rabbinical student in Boston, and I'm excited to be on the call. So I grew up in a family that prioritized social justice. From a young age, we were taught that the crux of our Jewish identity meant standing up for justice and standing up for those who are marginalized. And for me, that meant unconditionally supporting Israel. So it was no surprise when I was in high school and joined a youth group, I took on every opportunity to become involved in work supporting and advocating for Israel. And that led me to a number of AIPAC policy conferences and AIPAC's prestigious high school summit. And I remember being at AIPAC's policy conference and walking into this room where our group leader pulled us aside and said, "You all are the top leaders, team leaders in the country, and we're so excited to see what you take away from this weekend." And they said, "But here's one catch. There may be some protesters outside, they're holding Palestinian flags, and they might be dangerous." So I thought, great. Like in every justice movement, there are good guys and there are bad guys. Clearly, the bad guys here are the Palestinians, and it's my job to fight against them. So I went through my day learning all about the various ways to support Israel unconditionally. We heard from various right-wing leaders telling their stories and continuing to explain to us why the Palestinians were bad. And that night at dinner, I remember sitting around a table with a group of people, sharing the various ideas that we had to bring back to our communities. As a newly out queer person, I was excited to bring a discussion about women in Israel to my community. And one of the people at the table said, "You know what? I actually think my dad could fund that for you." I was so excited. This person whose dad actually funded our trip to go to AIPAC was willing to support my program. And later I learned, though, that this person whose dad had funded my way to AIPAC, his dad also was funding strong anti-LGBT organizations. So this person who was funding the social justice, the Israel that I had been taught my entire life was the crux of social justice, was also supporting organizations that tried to invisibilize my newfound identity. And it didn't stop there. As I continued to learn more about AIPAC and the organizations that AIPAC supported and partnered with, I realized that AIPAC was taking money and standing in partnership with anti-Semites, people who are Islamophobic, and white nationalists. I realized that this justice organization and this justice movement that I had been taught was the crux of my Jewish identity for my entire life wasn't about justice. And I couldn't reconcile the two. Now, as a rabbinical student committed to pluralism and standing as a Jew for justice, I can't be involved in a Jewish community that allows AIPAC to speak for it. I see as AIPAC is tearing apart our Jewish community and making it incredibly difficult for folks like me and many others to show up in justice spaces as a Jew and say, we stand with you in solidarity. Because AIPAC means that the Jewish community stands against justice. In my work, I'm seeing that people and many within the Jewish community are saying that AIPAC is apolitical because it's the thing that we do. I love the Jewish community, and I'm committed to the Jewish community doing better. But as long as AIPAC continues to partner and stand by Islamophobes, anti-Semites, and white nationalists, I know that I can't commit to being at another AIPAC conference for the rest of my life. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for sharing your story. My name is Mariah. I am the Political Education Director for If Not Now, and I'm going to share a little more about the context, and we'll all learn together a little bit about AIPAC as an organization. I will say there's a lot to know about AIPAC, so we're certainly not going to hit all of it, but we will also be sharing a link to a fact sheet that we've created if you're interested in learning more. And so I'm going to begin sharing my screen with you. And I hope everyone can see it. So just starting with some basics, AIPAC was founded in 1954 as the CPA, sorry, I got the acronym wrong. It's real alphabet soup. The American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs. They changed its name to the American Israel Political Affairs Committee, AIPAC, in 1959. They are not a PAC, but rather a political operation, a C4 operation. They don't give money to campaigns directly, but what they do is direct their membership towards fundraising for certain campaigns and away from other campaigns based on the candidates' positions on Israel. They also cultivate potential candidates, recruit them, support them to run against incumbents whom they disagree with. And so through their membership, although they are not a PAC themselves, they've directed significant amounts of capital towards curating the Congress we have today, an unquestioningly pro-Israel Congress. In addition to the work with political candidates, they also take members of Congress on trips to Israel and sort of provide the narrative frame that Congress members are using to make decisions on foreign policy related to Israel, and also promote legislation that fits their, pro-Israel at any cost agenda. So they are, the candidates whom they direct their membership to support financially, they also, they have a lot of sway among how they're voting legislatively. A sampling of legislation they have backed through the years. So in 1995, they backed a bill to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Sounds familiar. This was in the midst of the Oslo peace process, which AIPAC officially endorsed and supported, and yet still backed this legislation, which was interpreted by many as a move to undermine the peace talks. It would have been very disruptive to the peace talks had the U.S. recognized Israeli sovereignty over disputed occupied territories in East Jerusalem. They were actually successful in passing the legislation, but they agreed to a clause that allowed the executive branch to delay implementation, and this was the clause that was invoked by Trump when he moved the embassy in 2017. So they laid the groundwork for that. Another example, in 2011, when the Palestinian leadership announced they were going to petition in the UN for statehood, AIPAC helped persuade 446 members of Congress to co-sponsor a resolution opposing the idea. In 2019, they backed a winning Senate bill opposing BDS, and some have speculated that the bill was calculated in part to drive a wedge between the pro-Israel Democratic establishment, the party elites, and the younger activist wing that was more willing to challenge unconditional U.S. support of Israel. The bill was successful in the Senate. The House decided not to take up the bill. And of course, their sort of flagship legislative accomplishment is their ability year after year to marshal their supporters in Congress to produce support for billions in U.S. aid to Israel, the vast majority, which is given in military aid, like 99.7% of that is military aid. And their efforts have made Israel the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign aid since World War II, averaging about $3.2 billion per year over the past 70-some years, adjusted for inflation. And for the past several years, as you can see from this congressional report, U.S. aid to Israel has hovered around $3.8 billion per year. In 2019, it was $3.8 billion, 3.3 for military aid, and $500 million for missile defense. And the only string attached to this funding is that 75% of it must be spent with U.S. weapons manufacturers. That really shocked me when I found that out. So I'll just let that sink in. The AIPAC Policy Conference is sort of the main event of AIPAC, and it's a huge event they hold every year to promote their agenda, and it really puts the politics of AIPAC on display. It is attended by some pictures of AIPAC. Honestly, as they say, these pictures are worth millions of words. That's Pence on some really big screens in a huge arena. Like, this is sort of the vibe of an AIPAC conference if you have never been. But the folks who attend the AIPAC conference, tons of members of Congress, rabbis, Jewish professionals, delegations from synagogues and youth groups, lay leaders. They're particularly attentive to the recruitment of hundreds of Black and Latinx political leaders, as well as Christian evangelical supporters. And it's also an important fundraising event where they connect their wealthiest members to their favored political candidates. It is an important event for AIPAC to advance their deeply Islamophobic narrative, whether that is equating bin Laden with Palestinians during the Second Intifada at their 2002 conference, or or targeting Ilhan Omar at their 2019 conference and kind of holding her up as proof of anti-Semitism on the left, and this is less than 6 months after the Pittsburgh shootings. So as the occupation has worsened, and AIPAC's unconditional support for Israel has become less palatable to their bipartisan coalition. They have added white nationalists and anti-Semites to the mix in a desperate attempt to hold on to their influence. This, of course, includes Donald Trump and evangelical speakers, right? Their speaker lineup especially shows their willingness to partner with anyone who sort of professes pro-Israel politics in order to maintain their influence. So as I mentioned, you know, their speaker lineup, of course, has included Donald Trump. Pastor John Hagee delivered the keynote in 2007. He is the founder of CUFI and once preached that Hitler was sent by God to speed the return of Jews to Israel so that Jesus would walk again. Steve Emerson, who is kind of one of the main figures in mainstreaming Islamophobia over the past 20 years. So why are we asking our leaders to skip AIPAC? The answer should hopefully be pretty clear at this point, but they have led the way in creating and protecting the status quo of unconditional support for Israel. It doesn't allow any dissent, regardless of how egregious or offensive Israel's behavior is. They have held the line in making sure that Israel has never been seriously pressed to make any concessions, which has led us directly and unsurprisingly to where we are today. The good news, the project of unconditional support for Israel is the weakest it's been in over 20 years. Why is this? Number one, the occupation is so clearly morally indefensible 50 years later. The rise of the Israeli right as well, AIPAC's enthusiasm for Netanyahu has really eroded the bipartisan facade of AIPAC. It's made it harder for AIPAC to kind of rally their bipartisan coalition. There is a new, bold, progressive, insurgent wing of the Democratic Party that is no longer willing to sort of put up with this politics as usual and willing to cede power to AIPAC. They are ready to put political consequences back on the table. So this moment is really ripe. It holds the possibility of being a pivotal moment. And we have the opportunity to make this choice really, really clear, right? Are you going to provide cover to our leaders? Ask them the question, are you going to provide cover for AIPAC's kind of desperate alliance with white nationalists, anti-Semites, anyone who says they're pro-Israel in order to promote their very Islamophobic, pro-Israel, any-cost agenda, you know, backing Trump's peace plan, backing Trump, Netanyahu continues to pass kind of increasingly right-wing legislation? Or are you going to be a true progressive and stand up for the Jewish community, stand up what's right? Are you going to be on the right side of history? And so a couple, as Sarah mentioned, a couple, if not now, members have been posing this question publicly to presidential candidates. And this is last weekend in New Hampshire. We are just going to watch these for an example of how we're engaging candidates on this issue and really using AIPAC as this moment to make that choice really, really clear, you know, which side are you going to be on. So I'm going to play and hopefully we can all hear it. Can you hear? Uh-oh. I'm sorry. She said a bunch of things after that. I can go back. But essentially, here, we can skip ahead. I think you get the point. You know, she goes on the record and says kind of a lot of, you know, A, that she's not going to AIPAC, and B, you know, really lays out her analysis for why she isn't going to go. And this was very exciting. You know, not all, it doesn't always go that way when you engage with candidates. So we'll watch this footage.
I know that you skipped before. Will you commit to skipping AIPAC? Why is that? I don't even know what it is.
So, you know, it's another narrative, but you know, and that kind of gives us right, the value of engaging candidates in this way is that, you know, we sort of get them on the record about their position, and we, you know, either they give us a great answer and we position them as a champion, or they give us a not great answer and then we can kind of continue to press them. And also that we demonstrate that there are young Jews out here who really care about this issue. And we, you know, through these videos, posting them online, we can really reach a broader audience. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit about how you can get involved with the Skip AIPAC campaign.
Great. Thanks, Mariah. You can sign this petition to call on progressive leaders and both elected officials and Jewish community leaders and presidential candidates to join you in skipping AIPAC this year. You can just sign it and share it online, share it with some friends who might be willing to sign it. Also drop the link in the chat. And if you have some more energy to engage in this campaign, you can make your voice even louder by doing a drop-in visit at your congressperson's office and ask them to commit to skip AIPAC. Or you could write an open letter to members of Jew leaders in your community and ask them to skip it, and we can help you get it published as an op-ed. If you're on this call right now and you want to do a drop-in visit with your congressperson, you can write drop-in in the chat right now. And if you're watching this broadcast on Facebook, you can write drop-in in the comments and someone will follow up with you about that. And also, if you're on the call and you'd like to write an open letter to your community leaders, you can write open letter in the chat. And you can also put that in the comments if you're watching the broadcast, and we will follow up with you. Be awesome if you wanted to do that. We would love to support you to make it happen. And the last thing you can do is, if you'd like to donate to enable this kind of work and to support us in being able to continue to organize in this way, you can donate at bit.ly/INN donate. I'll put that link in the chat too. All contributions to the movement are welcome and are important to making sure that we continue to be a grassroots funded organization that can be continuing to occupy this political space in the movement right now.